Hey everyone, this is Chris. You're listening to the Dead Regime podcast. I've got Joel here, and we're going to be joined very soon by our guest for this episode. But before we get into that, I wanted to address a question. Someone, a new listener, asked me the other day, Chris, you should do some ads and have sponsors. And I said to them that that would be great if we had sponsors and we could do ads. Anyone who listens to Sam Harris's podcast knows that he does this whole 5-minute monologue at the beginning where he talks about why he doesn't do ads, and it's very ethical and meaningful, and we really don't care. If someone wants to sponsor us, please get in contact with us, deadregime@gmail.com. Hit us up through any of the social media outlets. We're pretty much on most of them. I think you're going to enjoy this episode. We've had to split it into two, so this is part one. Part two will be out later this week. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, here we go. Joel, how you going?
I'm very well.
And we've got a special guest, Rob Proffitt-White. Welcome, Rob.
You're welcome, thank you.
Now, Rob, you are our second guest on the Dead Regime podcast, but you're not my first podcast guest. Because I don't know if you remember, way back, I think it was 2012.
Okay.
We sat in the back of my classroom and we actually recorded a mathematics audio recording that went up on the school website. And apparently it's still available.
I can't remember that.
And we talked about numeracy. We talked about how teaching had changed and what parents should be expecting from numeracy education. You'll be glad to know that in those 7 years, we're still talking about numeracy, how the teaching's changed, and what parents can expect from numeracy education.
Yeah, it would have been actually quite interesting to listen to that before or even after, to make sure I don't contradict myself.
So we I should be able to find that, because I'm sure I've got it somewhere. It would be good to listen to. But Rob, we've got you in because I know you've got some things that you want to talk about. I thought a good place to start would be where education is changing and why, and perhaps the 21st century 6 C's might be the key starting point.
I think what all countries are trying to do now for their students, whether they're secondary or primary, is just to make them more aware and to value that there's other elements they can be successful with apart from just the traditional content. We've got to be careful that we don't water down the content. Of course it's important, but I think we're fully aware now that each kid's individual, and the 21st century skills are certainly something that all our students need to be aware of. And as a parent, I think parents need to be aware of that. If we can understand what these are, you might find that your child who may not have been quite interested in school or feels a bit anxious about school, knowing what these are could be a way in to help them, be a bit more motivated, a bit more engaged. So a push around the world now for these 21st century skills seems to be one element that I think all parents and students need to be aware of what they are, and hopefully in the next bit of talk we can sort of delve into those.
Into what they are. Do you want to outline what they are?
Well, yeah, I mean, the different countries come up with different ones, but generally the ones you need to be familiar of is the area of critical and creative thinking. Now, critical and creative thinking, that's how the kids use their content. So you want kids even in early years to be able to problem solve, make decisions, reason, reflect on what they're doing, evaluate what they're doing, and then be a bit more creative. From a maths point of view, if we're looking at maths today as well, is being a bit more creative in how they solve problems, how they do calculations. I'm sure we'll talk about calculations during this morning, because I know most parents want to know about calculations and times tables, but there's elements of creativity in there about how they build patterns and relationships with numbers, and those two elements, critical and creative thinking, seem to be things to make kids find maths and numeracy a bit more accessible. Other than that, you've got communication, getting them to talk, you've got ICT skills, and the one that's probably the hardest to teach is their personal and social skills, their group management, their self-esteem, their self-efficacy. And at the moment, it's very topical in all education systems around the world. How can we help boost kids' perseverance, resilience, minimise anxiety? And again, hopefully today we can, talk about things that seem to be working, because I know there'll be parents or our audience who'll be interested to know a bit about that.
One of the challenges of being a teacher in a modern classroom is that every parent has an experience of education.
They do.
Which means that everyone has gone through an education process. Most people tend to think that what they experienced is what should be experienced by their kids.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that is actually classed as one of the biggest barriers to move for parents, because every parent wants their child to do well, and every parent sets out to do what they think is best. Now, I myself, my memories of maths at school were very traditional. I don't remember actually being taught much. I remember even when I was in year 3, there were these plastic wallets around the perimeter of the room, like addition, subtraction, measurement, and I remember vivid memories of just walking to the front, collecting an addition card, coming back to my desk, writing the word addition, doing 20 questions, going to the box to get a coloured pencil, marking it myself, lining up, spending 10, 20 minutes wasting time, queuing up to be marked. The teacher would then just put a big tick, I sit back down, go to the next card, which is number 2, and there's 20 more addition. And then you work your way around the year, doing everything in isolation. Now, I could say, well, that's got me to where I am, a state advisor for maths now. But it wasn't that. It was that probably didn't get me where I was today. And I know fully well that some of my friends who went through that system aren't successful. They hate maths. It's boring. So you've got to remember that as a parent, if we enjoyed maths, and sometimes it's hard. If you're a parent who's quite successful at maths, you will then assume that the traditional way is always the best, and it can be, but it might not work for you or your kid. And so I think, how we used to do it has still got advantages. There's still a traditional sense involved, because maths, you need to be focusing on getting things right and being accurate, but, and it's a big but, parents need to be aware of there's many journeys to get to that destination, and we need to discover for your kids, how are they going to actually cope with how they learn the maths and value it, use it, see it. So in answer to that question, how we used to do it has elements, but we need to hopefully talk about how we can involve these 21st century skills to make maths a bit more accessible and enjoyable for our kids.
So what has changed?
I think what's changed for me is even in the 10, 15 years I've been in Queensland, it's what universities are looking for. It's what job people are looking for. And it's not just to be good at maths. Let's face it, to be good at maths, if I say the word maths to students at uni, we still think about sums. And arithmetic is part of maths, like spelling is part of reading, but there's still quite a bit more around it. So I think we need to make sure that we just go beyond that arithmetic, because you want your kids to be able to problem solve, to discuss, to defend, to justify, to get them actually actively participating. I think the biggest worry for parents is most kids, even by grade 3, can say to their mums or dads, I don't like maths. And when you discover why, it's often they find it very isolated, very disciplined, very uncreative, or they're so used to doing basic stuff that the teachers made them do something slightly different or slightly correct, like dissolve and defend, that the kid's gone home, I don't like maths anymore because I'm being asked how to explain it. And so you've got this balance, this seesaw of giving your
that
kid...
can even be for students who are good at arithmetic.
That can be for students who are good.
Because that student is so used to following a procedure and getting it right, that then being told that there might be other ways to solve it that are just as valid, or having to defend why they know can be just as challenging for the good arithmetic student as a poor arithmetic student.
You're right. End of the day, I mean, arithmetic is you want your kids to be able to solve problems, basic number sense problems. And yeah, of course, there's going to be technology for them. But there's a lot of estimation and a lot of number sense. And one thing you found quite interesting is, as a parent, often if you take a group of adults, the maths that they can do, they just call common sense. The maths that they can't do, they just call, oh, that must be maths then. And we ourselves have a lot of responsibility. We can perpetuate problems, inadvertently, because we don't recognise the day-to-day maths that we use, which is financial stuff and general spatial stuff and estimation. And as a parent, we need to tell kids that that is maths.
Yeah.
Because you're right, when I think of maths, I would say today, I've survived without using calculus and trigonometry, and that's what parents think. Oh, well, I didn't use trigonometry or calculus, or why are they doing this? Well, let's move beyond that and look at the maths you are still using when you're going shopping, when you're doing your financial plans, your unit plans, your phone, your budgeting, DIY, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's what we've got to say to kids.
And it seems to be much easier for parents to grasp the idea that literacy and English are actually separate things, that the skills in literacy are used in the subject of English, but they are separate. It seems to be much harder for people to understand the differences between numeracy and mathematics.
Yeah, I mean, generally, maths is always seen as quite abstract, full of conjectures, full of proofs, quite nerdy, and but in a way, it sort of blocks the outside world. And a lot of people can think, I'll never need maths because I just don't associate. And that's fair enough, because that high level applied maths is still what we see on the news. Yeah. Only recently, I remember somebody had found, was it a prime number to a trillion places or something? And it's like, that's on the news, but that doesn't help this image of parents going, see, I told you, when will we ever need that? And I must admit, but day to day, we need to make sure that kids see that numeracy is actually that ability just to quickly round up numbers, quickly add, quickly subtract, which is arithmetic based. And unis now are wanting kids to have those skills. They don't want them to rely on just using a calculator. And what you said before, how is it changing? Well, it's changing because non-calculator papers are now becoming more frequent in all countries, because we've said our kids are arriving not actually knowing how to manipulate numbers, which is what maths is about, manipulating the numbers, that idea of quantity, looking at the patterns and relationships between numbers. A lot of kids have lost that, and that's why they have this fear and phobia. They'll either stick to doing safe stuff on apps and games, which can drive that anxiety even deeper, or they will just avoid involving themselves with complicated numbers or fractions or decimals. But we've got to, as a parent, say to them, look guys, life is full of all these. There's not a job now without a graphic or a chart that will have some percentage, decimal, visual representation, like a quarter of a pie chart. Kids should know that's 25% or a quarter. It's everywhere, with a growing reliance now on Keep Fit and technology for that, which is everywhere. A grasp of basic addition, subtraction, 20%, 50%, 75%. We need to make sure kids have that and aren't scared of it.
As the apps and games, I want to go back to the 21st century skills, which lends itself to the idea of using technology. And I see a lot, pardon me, I see a lot of classrooms using apps and games as a means for teaching numeracy. I'll save my thought for after.
Sure,
for after
okay.
So it doesn't appear I'm preempting your opinion. What's your thoughts on apps and games as a vehicle for teaching numeracy?
Well, first and foremost, to engage kids, making maths engaging is critical, to hook them in. And I would advocate, to teachers playing some kind of games, whether they're just pen and paper games or using apps and things, does encourage kids when they can go online and have in the early years, the nice fun graphics, collecting stickers and charts and ladders and things for solving basic number facts. Great, it gets them involved with those sorts of things. And the software design these days is great. No, it's visual, it's stimulating, absolutely. And then we need to, I suppose, balance that though with there's more than just that superficial side to maths. Again, you can get apps on spelling, but mastering spelling does not necessarily mean they're a great writer.
Yeah.
And parents understand that, but there's still a lack of sometimes national understanding that, arithmetic is not just maths. There's a lot more to it than that. So these apps and games, I think they're it's like nutrition, it's that boring everything in moderation.
Yeah.
And people don't like that. They like to buy or have one view or the other, but sadly I would say that a well-balanced diet for maths would include a portion of apps and games to keep them. And as a parent, I would make sure that the kids aren't just guessing and checking, because I've got kids myself, and when I first had these, kids know, they just keep hitting an answer, tap, 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 until that smiley face appears. And then after an hour, they could run off and show someone, I got 100 out of 100.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Because as a parent, we often don't sit with the kids.
No.
We'll just, off they go, they'll come back, they do this. And a lot of the apps don't go behind the scenes. It's just, if they can get the answer, no matter how many attempts they get, we will give them a happy sticker.
Yeah.
So it's just making sure that those apps maybe sit with the kid and see what they do. Because if a kid in year 3 is doing, 8 plus 5, and they're using fingers still, it's great they get a smiley face with a thumbs up. But that strategy is not particularly critical thinking. That is going to slow them down and probably give them fear and anxiety. So as a parent, we need to see it's not the answer, it's their destination to the answer that we need to be aware of, because that's why parents can often say to me, oh, my kid does well on these apps, but they're only a C. And I say, look, because you're only giving them a very low level thing. As a teacher or a school, we need to make sure your kids can use and apply. If they can't apply, there's not many job opportunities in the 21st century, or it's going to be a job, but as a parent, you won't want your kid in that job. So we got to make sure that they know what to do with this knowledge.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. You got anything you want to shoot me?
No, I'm just taking notes.
Yeah, that's why I was like, you're taking notes, so you might have something you want to...
No, I just like some of the phrases. That's a good one. It's not the answer, it's the destination to the answer. And my personal experience, I was one of those I hate math kids, very disengaged. And I realised as a teacher, the kids that were good at maths, and we're talking probably the older style of maths, were the kids that had instant recall, the kids that didn't question formulas. If you said to divide, you follow this process. They didn't ask why, they didn't care why. They just went, there's the process, I follow it, I get the answer, because I've also got my recall on multiplication and division, and they just found it easy. I was constantly trying to understand, and that was my big problem. In the system that I went through, understanding would actually set you back. The teacher would look at you and go, there's nothing to understand, just do what I told you to do.
Just follow the process.
And it wasn't actually until you came to a school that I was at, and I started seeing some of the things that you were trying to teach the teachers, the students and the parents. And every bit of it just made me go, yes, I understand. So there has been a big shift, and I can, from personal experience, can actually look at the shift and it makes total sense. And it also makes sense to what you were saying, some of the naturally gifted or people who are naturally geared for maths, they're not necessarily going to do well in the future because they need to understand. They need to be able to demonstrate understanding. And so they, I think it's a playing field where everyone can actually come to the party, this new way of looking at it.
No, I would agree. I think it's, I mean, some kids, as you said, will naturally have that maths intuition and they will go, but every kid has the potential to be maths, have that maths intuition. And I think one fallacy is it's like, oh, I wasn't good at maths, so therefore my kid goes. And we know like people like Joe Bowler and a few others, they will try and smash that rhetoric, because that is one of the things that we hear quite a lot. It's almost given permission for the kid. Oh, well, my mum says that I wasn't good at maths, so she doesn't need it, so I don't need it. That one statement destroys, a year of education.
Yeah.
So as a parent, we need to be, accountable for what we say, how we react around numbers and things. And I think that is really, really critical. But the good news is you don't have to be good at maths yourself to help with your kid. And that's another thing that some parents think of.
Yes, because it's almost dismissing mathematics as a potential pathway because the parent wasn't good at math.
Yes.
So for those parents who believe they're not good at math, how do you suggest they help their children?
Well, I sometimes find that if I take my role as well, people often assume, that I'm excellent at maths, but I wasn't. I was I have vivid memories of going out to the special education thing to have help with fractions. I remember making myself purposely sick in year 2 and 3 so I could go home or not do maths. I was scraping a C up to year 10, and I ditched maths in year 10. I hated it because it never made sense. And yet 20, 30 years later, I'm, advising maths across the state. It's like, but it's not so much the maths, it's so much, I think that's an injustice of the word maths. I'm more like getting kids to engage with and seeing maths for what it actually is. It's more the problem solving, the critical creative thinking, the manipulating numbers. And I know that once all kids, even the gifted kids, once they see more evidence of the patterns and relationships and defending and justifying, that strengthens their own skills even further. Because again, some parents think, well, my kids are great at number, they don't need to do defending and justifying. But as Joel said, yes, they do, because they really need to be able to focus on these critical skills, because year 12, we assess it. Yeah. Universities want it.
Yeah.
And so it's not a case of, oh, I don't think my kid should. These kids have to value it. And that's why a lot of schools today are starting to get kids, not all the time, just be aware of, look, you've got the answer, great, but can you tell me how you got it? Because as a teacher, I need to know that your process is actually effective and it's not misinterpreting things, because a lot of kids can get the right answer for the wrong reason. And as a teacher, I need to know how your kid, as a parent, you should be really happy that your teacher is probing the understanding of your kid by asking them different questions. Yes, every kid can draw half if I give them a lovely equilateral triangle. Can you show a half on this, And what we tend to do is draw a line down the middle, so that takes the thinking away from it, and the kid just colours in half, gets a tick. Now that does not mean they know what a half is. They're just following a procedure that's so scaffolded they don't even have to think. What I would do is I'd give them a square cut into 4 and say, can you shade in half of this? Now if a kid can shade in two of those quarters to make a half, they have conceptual understanding. They're not very likely to ever forget that. But a lot of kids won't. They'll say, I can't do that, because they'll colour in one. They'll colour in 1. Because usually if I colour in 1, when the teacher says half, I get tick, I sit down, I get a smiley face. So we have to make sure your kids, and that's why some kids can come home in the early years a bit upset, because their fragile confidence has been pushed, but it's because the teacher's doing what's right. And if we identify a kid's got false confidence, that false confidence later on in school can come back and cause major issues, more of a headache as a parent with a year 6 or 7 kid who hates numbers and refuses to do it. Believe me, I'd rather suffer 1 or 2 tantrums in year 2 with a kid saying, why do I have to do this? Sort that out, than wait till year 7 and have a teenager who just says, I hate school, can't do it. Whenever I see a number, I'll switch off.
Mind you, sometimes those students are easier to deal with than the A math student who doesn't understand why they have to justify and reason.
Absolutely. But again, it's about valuing, because we know if it's important to us and we value it, it'll be done. And I think a lot of the time when I interview kids, Yeah, no, I'm not saying all, but a lot of the time the kids will actually quote back what their mums and dads have said. It's not what the teacher has said. Oh, well, my dad said that we don't need to do that because he didn't. And yeah, it's not exactly helpful. But I used to do it because if I went back to my school days, I never defended. I was never even asked to talk about. I
it
never
wasn't
wrote
necessary.
words in maths. It was just number churning. So therefore, I can totally understand with why I would, if I wasn't in education, Chris, I would probably be doing exactly the same with my kids.
Yeah.
If they're not very good at maths, I'll print out some sheets and things and just do this.
And
And there's
withdraw.
nothing wrong with that because we know kids in year 8 or 9 can forget basic procedures, and I would say go for it, because if they haven't got the basic procedures, they'll be scared. So there is but I would like to make sure the message is clear to our listeners that even though that's fine to do that, we've got to go beyond that. Being good at just the procedure does not equate to your kid will be successful at mathematics. You know, you use knowing the periodic table. Of course, it's going to help with science, but knowing the periodic table does not make you a scientist. You're not going to walk into a medical degree. Well, I know the periodic table, and I've even got a song about it. You know, you need to be a bit more than that. You know, and I think that's what we're trying to get across. But
And that parent talk could be, instead of, I was really bad at maths, so it doesn't matter, I found maths really difficult. I can see that you're finding it really difficult. I'm sure that you'll get there if you keep trying.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, the thing, effort, we need to reward effort. I don't think the political system helps all the time in any country where it's just like this A, B, C, D, E all the time for content delivery. And it does upset a few kids. Yeah, some kids do fine with it. At the end of the day, I could take a view, well, the world keeps turning, so nothing can't... So why is education, why are we spending so much money on it? Because every year we get the same kids getting through uni, the jobs get filled. So you can see there's that hidden depth there of a lot of people think, what is the problem?
Yeah.
But we can do better. You know, we can do better than this.
I'd settle for a parent who says, I wasn't good at math. You should be celebrating the fact that we're not teaching math the same way you got it taught. Like, that should be a cause for you to celebrate, because we are changing the way it's been taught. So that parent should be relieved that their child isn't going to go through the same process, instead of fighting back against it because it's what they experienced. So that's where that's where my push is always, hey, look, you know, your mechanic today isn't working on a Model T Ford. Mathematics isn't being taught the same way as you had it taught. So let's celebrate that instead of fighting against it. The A to E stuff, though, is really interesting, because it's been a big thing in my pedagogy about eliminating as much grading as possible, because I don't think most people realize how little difference there is between an A and a C and a C and a D. When you really look at things in isolation, what a student needs to know to get within those different bands is not it's not a big difference. And so focusing on those grades, to me, has always eaten away at confidence not of the A students. The A students have always got the confidence, but that student who's struggling to get a C, they think they're a long way from getting an A, but they're not.
And you're right, they're not, because I mean, I think we as parents need to know that an A in year 3 is just year 3 material, and there is a tension between certain establishments. Let's just say that sometimes I'm a year 3. Well, in this year 3 school, we give our year 3 kids a year 4 textbook. And parents, oh, that's wonderful, they're a year ahead. No, they're not a year ahead. I could teach Pythagoras' theorem, which is year 8, to a year 2.
Yeah.
Because I'll teach them the procedure and they will get that right. Now, that doesn't mean in any way I should celebrate the fact that that kid is 6 years ahead and will be on front line on the Courier Mail as a gifted kid. We have to be very careful. And what you said, the jump from a C to an A isn't out of reach of a lot of kids, because the problem-solving, reasoning things in the C, you just get better at it for A. But you find what the A and B kids do have more of is more probably a positive role modelling by their parents, That's something you can't buy, and that's something that you can do just like that. You don't need to buy any apps for your iPads or anything. Just role modelling, praising the effort, telling them that they're getting better, giving them the right help as well. That will make a big difference, because I find that D kids can jump from C to B quite easily once they've got that inner intrinsic motivation to do it. But on the other side, A kids can drop from A to D. If they suddenly hit a wall, or they jump from another subject, or they just lose that motivation, they get disengaged.
And especially once they leave primary school and they are actually experiencing new content for the first time, that does ask them to think deeper than just going through the same procedures over and over again.
You do, because when I work with year 7s, I can often get a lot of time when I'm in a year 7 classroom and they start doing algebra. Yes, you'll get some kids who just clicks, I get this, and off they go. But others, it's a whole new language, it's a whole new world for them, and they feel bad. And sometimes these are A grade kids who've always had an A. Now they've hit something where they need to think, and suddenly you see these poor little minds collapse. They can often bounce back, but it depends the sort of interventions that they hear from home, or what they get at school. But a lot of the time is those kids are the ones who are what I call the fragile, or the cappuccino A's. The cappuccino A's, they're the ones who've got A's just by drilling, just by doing hard looking sums. They've managed to get through, either because the assessment's not always up to scratch, or the assessment doesn't actually assess the rigour of the 21st century. They have this idea that they're great, because I've had battles with, helping teachers in prep. Oh, my kid knows the 2 times table in prep, so what? It doesn't mean they're good at math. They've just learnt a row of words which are adjectives, so they've learnt a poem. 1, 2 is 2, 2, 2 is 4. Doesn't mean they can draw an array or explain to me the relationship between 6 and 3 and 9 and 4 and 8. And yet a parent will say, oh, no, they're well ahead. I looked online and they're already working at a grade 2 level. No, they're not working at a grade 2 level, In rare circumstances, they might be, but I've not come across many.
No, but then, because I had that thought before as well, we were talking about gifted students. How many legitimately gifted math students do you see?
Not many. But I think even if I take the UK, there was a time in the UK a few years ago where 30% of kids had to be classed as gifted and talented as a political thing. And I'm not saying that that's happening here, but I'll be surprised if it isn't, because all schools want a lovely G&T. So let's just make it. But then it's, how do we measure what makes a gifted and talented kid? Are we measuring the 21st century skills? Because I've come across students before who are in an extension program, but they can't think. They have no resilience. Now, as an employer, I don't want a kid like that. So what, they can recite algorithms and do Pythagoras' theorem if they're told what to do. I want to see what these kids can do. And I take China as an example. China now, yes, their kids come in here and they get, with great recollection, or recall, I should say, of skills and basics, but they lack the creativity. There's now a huge drive in those countries like China to get kids to be more application, reasoning, thoughtfulness.
And that's despite their top ranking in OECD data. Because
employers don't just want that. We're moving away. We're not saying, I don't want people to think, oh, I've heard, they're saying that content's not important. Of course it's important, but it's what we do with the content now. 21st century is, we'll assume every kid has memorised procedures and formulas and everything. So let's take that for granted. As an employer, I want to know what your kid can do with that knowledge. If they can't cope with defending it, justifying it, showing me ways, I don't want them. I need my employees to be adaptable, to be resilient, to be positive, have transferable skills. Even today, looking at some of the stats on degrees, there was one about 2 years ago where it's something like physics degrees, only about 15% of physics degree students are in a job where physics is their main focus. Now, that's not saying 85% are unemployed. it's the skills of their minds, the process skills. Other jobs want them. There are a lot of them employed in media because their way they can analyse, look for algorithms and data and analyse things as well. Their mind, so it's this whole thing. A lot of the legal degrees, they're not in law, but they're employed in the media for their ability to write and persuade and all of that. So you can see these degrees that kids do, they're multifaceted, and they're looking at the skills. Once you've got the basic content, we need to say to our kids, let's promote these skills, make your kid feel good. I've got 2 kids myself, you know, chalk and cheese. But the one who's not necessarily good academically, they've got better skills in design, critical thinking, communication. They're good at helping others. So I said, there's plenty of jobs for that. Why should I have a teenager who feels a failure with the school system because they're getting C's and D's on just standardised tests when
and
they
where
potentially...
in fact, anyone who gets a job working with people
absolutely
has more opportunity in the next 10, 20 years than any other person.
I think so. But as a dad, it's hard because they're surrounded by a system that only values ABC, that only values do this test, make this 10-slide PowerPoint for a grade on a piece of paper. We'll give you 8 weeks of the term where you do nothing, and then you'll suddenly get 2 weeks where you're doing 6 different homeworks, 6 assignments to get a grade on a piece of paper. Turn the page, let's start again and repeat. You know, and it's like, no, something's not right there. Some kids survive that, but too many kids don't.
Yeah, and that's just because it worked for you or just because it didn't damage you doesn't mean that we should keep going. That's always been my argument about education, is that why would we persist in doing something that doesn't work for everybody?
It's true. I mean, because you think about it, you go through the motions. I mean, all kids now forced into university, it seems, there's a lot of revenue at stake here. We're just, it's almost like a rite of passage now, 45% kids go straight to university. But how many actually know what they want to do? I was chatting to some grade 10s about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was quite disheartening to see how much stress, not all of them, some of them, are already going through. They're talking about anxiety to go to university, and that's year 10 term 1. Pressure from, let's just say, other elements of their life or people, and this is sad. I mean, and we know that these kids will have probably different careers. Why not have a gap year? Why not have a time to think? There's going to be jobs there. I mean, or for those kids who aren't academic, I think some countries have some really good avenues. I mean, they're starting to get better at this now. Universities are now offering like diplomas and things more, which I think is great, because kids need to see that you might not know, just because you don't go to university does not mean you'll never be successful. And I think, I did my degree. I went through the motions of my degree an honours degree in business. Am I using that today? Probably not, I've got some element. Again, I've not got the content knowledge, but the skills and the processes I learned in that degree to analyse, to be critical thinking, my marketing skills of stuff. I'm using the actual 21st century skills of that. But at the same time, I need the basics.
Yeah.
That's it. Because the opposite side of these play people who say, let's just focus on the soft skills. I said, yeah, but the soft skills without the hard facts are useless. And I've come across some, ideas where it's been quite wishy-washy, where kids are doing critical creative thinking on a project in year 8 and the rigour is year 4. I said, that's rubbish, that's not going to help the kid. Oh yeah, but they like it. Of course they like it. You show me a teenage kid who can do some stuff, there's billions to be made on that. And so, as I said, it's getting that balance right, which is hard, because a lot of the time I don't think there's enough support for our teachers to get that balance right. It's one thing or the other. Suddenly it's all 21st century skills and no rigour.
But it's 21st century skills, but here's your A to E data that we're measuring everything by.
Yeah.
And we're trying to measure things that can't be measured in the same way, the way we've always measured it.
I think so, because that whole thing about what we value, what we measure, then what's great to be in education now is there's a big movement around, to help kids identify other elements, but we've got to make teachers, students, principals aware of this, but they can't do it before the system. And the sad news is the tension between research and practice is really about research will talk about the 21st century, what's right, but the system, every system in the world, just wants it's got to be easily measurable. So let's just measure the content. Let's give A to E's out, hand them out. And so if that's if that's what we're judged by, then assessment often gravitates to that.
And then practice is informed by it as well, because often research is based on best practice. From a research point of view, is often based on what got the best standardized test result or what got the best A to E data result, not what is going to achieve the best outcomes for the students as a well-adjusted citizen, of the world. So then we adopt practices that just enforce standardized test results and A to E data rather than what really is best practice. So it's like a vicious cycle.
That's about 10 years ago, and it's still true. I mean, I think, again, I'll say that Joe Bowler over in the States, she said that, with mathematics, we know what works with maths, but it's still not happening in the classrooms because it will take too long. It'll take more than an election cycle, to make it work. And it means slightly changing what we measure and what we do and how we help each other, which, sadly, is a long-term plan. And we live in a world where it's just short-termism. But as a parent, making parents aware of the long-term, goals or the line of sight around 21st century skills, I think is a useful thing for them to know. And it makes them it makes some parents feel a bit more hopeful as well. If you've got great kids doing this, then focusing on this will only strengthen that. And if your kid seems to be struggling at school, then looking at these sorts of other ways of measuring success might be a way in, might make them. I've certainly been using this with one of my kids, and it's giving them that hope that, you might not be good yet, but don't let it get you down, because having a career, if you're skilled at working with people, I can tell you now that there's going to be jobs, plenty of jobs in that area if you're good on, that sort of thing. And as long as you can communicate and be good with the basics, don't get upset that you can't do trigonometry. You might not need that. You might not need that. Even yesterday I was just trying to read some stuff online around research articles from unis about looking at that, and I think one of them has talked about around 55% of students will probably need something like calculus or in a form in their job, but 45% won't. So when you see all year 10s doing it, it does raise that question. Then when they say, why are we doing this? Well, half of them won't ever need it. But you can say to them, look, think of it not so much as the content, think of it as just the process of, applying, problem solving. It's like poetry. Yes, you're probably not going to do poetry, but it's the process of creating one, looking at words, using everything, the way you can use your grammar, your punctuation, your way with words, your audience. It's a nice avenue to show me what you can create.
Art's a good analogy though as well, because often you don't know what aspects of art you really appreciate until you get exposed to really good art. How many primary school kids hate poetry?
Yeah.
Until they discover a really good poet and then go, or realize that Bob Dylan is poetry. Until you really connect with something in the art world that is of super high quality, you don't really understand that you can appreciate it. Mathematics is kind of the same way. Okay, maybe calculus is never something that you're going to use, but it doesn't mean you can't appreciate the process of calculus. And,
True. Yeah.
And how you get to solving a problem through it.
And it comes back to what we said before around that, because, for example, if you just learnt to write a certain, persuasive text in year 5, you could churn that out again in year 7, and even in year 9, and still probably pass. Whereas with something like maths or science, you've got to do, if you learnt something with shape, but then the test is on trigonometry or the test is on measurement, you can't. Yeah. And that's the difference, There is maths and science tend to have specific content, specific skills you have to have as you go up, which for a lot of, and in other subjects, it's not so obvious as that. You know, I'm not saying there's not enough rigor in others. Of course there is, but there's certain specific things you need to be successful in maths in year 9. You can't just use your adding, subtracting, multiplying. You need to have index laws. You need to have Pythagoras' theorem, volume of 3D shapes, linear equations. The graphs. There's a whole host of things. So for a lot of kids, it's, oh my God, there's so much new stuff to do. Why can't I just write better using the basic tools? So I think with maths, the basic tools keep changing.
Yeah.
There's always a line through, but they keep, there's definitely a bit more, and that's why maths can for kids be slightly more, an austere way of looking at disciplines they've got to achieve, they've got to master all the time. But generally, if we can build in these connections through these 21st century skills, I think experience, that's won kids over, or got more chance of making them remember and retain information, which I think is a big thing for a teacher and a parent, is the retention rates. A lot of kids forget maths because, quite disconcertingly, they say that we can, because I'll just get taught it again. And so they've learned not to value long-term memory in maths. They're just short-term, in it goes, get to the test, forget it again. And I'm not saying that's, you can't advocate that, but that's what's happening, and it's the way it's done. A term of this, teach, test, forget, bang, next we get off we go again. So as a parent, we're trying to work with schools, like we said before, to try and keep strands of concepts going. So that's why, as a parent, it might be, you might get some stuff to do with your kid at home. That's not what they're doing at the moment, but it's safeguarding against them forgetting. Because if a kid forgets, they get stressed. And we don't want that happening with a year 2 kid or a year 10 kid.
That's the end of part 1. Part 2 will be released later this week. Remember to hit us up on social media, dadregime@gmail.com, Facebook, Twitter. Where else are we? Instagram. Catch you next time. See ya.